This week on the agenda, falling fertility. We'll examine why governments around the world are introducing new policies to encourage more women to have children. Fertility rates are falling across the world. Countries, including China and the UK, have recently announced their lowest birth rates on record, and concerns are mounting that we could soon face what experts term population collapse. But what does that really mean for the world, and especially the global economy? And what can be done to prevent any problems? Joining me now are Jennifer Sciubba, President and CEO of the Population Reference Bureau, and Jesús Fernández-Villaverde, Professor of Economics at the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you both for coming on the agenda. Now, Jesús, I'll start with you, because the World Economic Forum says that 2064 will be the first year in modern history where the global death rate surpasses the global birth rate. Are we on the verge of population collapse, or is it already happening?
Well, it depends on how you define already. Certainly, according to my calculations, humanity is already below replacement rate. That means it's already the case that the average woman is having fewer children than is necessary to keep the world population constant. The world population will still continue growing a few more decades, just because the previous cohorts of women are very large and they are having kids right now. How long will it take before total population starts going down is still a little bit on the air. According to my own calculations, it will be around 2055, a little bit earlier than the World Economic Forum that says 2064. The United Nations says it's going to be around 2084, although I think the United Nations numbers have serious problems. So yes, we are about to be in a new situation that we haven't really experienced, which is a sustained fall in population in the globe for many decades to come.
So, Jennifer, does the world need more babies?
Well, it's not necessarily that every baby that's born fits so seamlessly in their lives into whatever economic structures are already prevailing. And so I think what we need to focus on more is the mismatch perhaps between the people that are already here and these structures that are around them. So there's not really that a very youthful population with lots of babies or an older population with more older people is inherently good or bad. It's really how each of those societies, those policies and economies are adjusted to them. And I am a bit worried about the fact that we aren't adjusting and are instead thinking more about how we just create more people instead of how we can be resilient with these older and in fact smaller populations.
So let's talk a little bit more about the demographic challenges then of falling fertility rates. Jesus, many countries, including China, the UK and Japan, have all recorded record low birth rates. So how worried should we be about it? And what are those demographic challenges?
The first and more fundamental challenge is going to be everything related with social security and other aspects of the welfare state. If you look at European countries and their budgetary situation, which I have done in some detail, for instance, in most countries in continental Europe, you look at the growth of government expenditure since the last 25 years, pretty much 80% of the increase in government consumption is related either with pensions or with health services provided to older people. So basically, you are going to have in a situation where most advanced economies are bankrupt, or the governments are bankrupt. There is going to be the need for massive fiscal adjustments, and I don't think people is thinking very carefully about it. In the case of countries with extremely low fertility rates like Japan or China, what we are going to encounter is such fast drops in the total working age population that their economies are going to actually do terribly bad in terms of economic growth, and that again is going to have very large consequences all across the economy. The best example is Japan. We have been talking over the last 25 years about how the Japanese economy is stagnated. What I have worked on my own research is to demonstrate that 100% of the reason behind Japan economic stagnation is the fact that their working age population has been falling since the early 1990s. So basically, it means that we are going to be in a situation of low economic growth, a terrible fiscal situation, and that's going to put societies in really a lot of very, very tight spots.
Well, what you've been doing there is focusing on some of the developed or more developed economies around the world. Many will point to birth rates in places like sub-Saharan Africa and say, look, that's where we've got some increases. Maybe that's some good news. You're not that convinced, though, are you, Jesus?
Oh, not at all. So first of all, because what a lot of people have not realized is that fertility has collapsed even faster in a lot of developing and emerging economies. So the standard test that I give to my friends when they ask me about this is, I'm going to give you 4 countries, and you need to tell me which one has the highest fertility rate. And the 4 countries I like to pick are Mexico, Brazil, Turkey, and the United States. And of course, everyone says, oh, the United States has the lowest fertility rate. And I say, no. Mexico, Brazil, and Turkey have lower fertility rate right now than the United States. So is this a problem for the United States? To some degree. Is this a problem for Brazil or for Mexico? Massive. It's way worse in this moment to be Mexico or Brazil in terms of population collapse than to be the United States. So this is more than anything a problem for emerging economies. Now, sub-Saharan Africa is a slightly different ballgame because fertility over there is very fast. It's still relatively high. Having said that, I think that everything that we are seeing in the data suggests that there is going to be a massive fertility collapse in sub-Saharan Africa during the 2030s, 2040s. And I wouldn't be surprised if most of Africa is below replacement rate by 2050.
We've got some countries who are investing quite heavily in these pro-natal policies. Like I'm thinking about Hungary, and they spend 5% of their GDP on that. China, that they've recently announced a series of new policies to hope to raise the birth rate. What should governments be doing now to address this issue?
They should definitely stop spending their money with the goal of raising birth rates. So I think inherently the problem is that we're painting it as an issue of births, and therefore the only solution sets we seem to be coming up with from a creative standpoint are those that address births. If instead we can reframe this not as an issue of births, but as an issue of a shifting age structure, which is the result of having fewer births, it opens up a totally different set of policy solutions, and ones that are really needed, like Jesus said, in terms of thinking about those countries that are welfare states, for example, and how they'll have to rebalance. Really different dynamics and social contracts between families and their governments. Those are all going to have to be renegotiated and played out in the political arena. And it's going to be a lot of heated political discussions for decades to come. But really just trying to focus on births can even have an unintended effect. The opposite consequences could happen. I think we see this in China, where the government doubling down on these very traditional family roles for women and saying, get back into the home, after they'd already educated so many women and shown them what opportunities there are to earn income outside the home and live these full lives, is only making women angrier and actually perhaps pressuring those fertility rates even lower.
And incentives in places like Hungary as well for women to have more children, tax breaks and things like that play into what you're talking about. You're talking about maybe focusing more then on the longevity economy. Jesus, I wonder if you chime in with that, or you think we should be doing more to address the fertility problem now?
Oh, yeah, totally. I 100% disagree with Jennifer. I actually think that the priority number one for every country in the Western world right now should be to increase its fertility rate. In the case, for instance, of the United Kingdom, if I were to have a 30-minute chat with the Prime Minister, I would say that the absolute top 100% national priority should be to increase fertility rate from around 1.44 to 1.8, 1.9, and that we should 100% reorganize our society towards that goal. There is a lot of things that we can do. We know, for instance, that a lot of things are related with the number of women who are at zero. That means women who never had any kid. That has a lot to do with housing prices. That has to do a lot with the labor market. That has to do a lot with the way we have organized education. But thinking that any society is going to be able to handle a fertility of 1.0 like China has right now, 0.7 like South Korea has now, without changing this fundamental fact is absolutely naive. It's never going to happen, and it goes against basic budgetary principles.
So I want to focus a little bit more with you on the longevity economy and then the impact it's having on the global economy and how we can maybe balance things out. I mean, when I talk about that, I mean the number of people paying tax versus the number of people receiving pension support and maybe disproportionate amounts of healthcare and that sort of thing. Should there be, or would you like to see more governments having more of a focus on that?
I think the problem is political. And I mean, Jesus, I think it's just as naive to act like this is an apolitical discussion, right? I mean, most economists would focus on these numbers and run the calculations, but all of this takes place within politics. I think we've got to keep putting this back in a political context. It's not just, theoretically, I can say as a political scientist that, oh, we see how the numbers shake out between those who are taxpayers and those who are old age dependents. And so here's the set of reforms that need to happen in order to rebalance things. But politically, it's completely impossible. It's the same as trying to, do a comprehensive overhaul of immigration. Any of these democracies that are facing this rapid population aging and depopulation, I think are probably going to fare far worse than actually those economies that are non-democracies. And they would have the ability, at least, to shift some of their policies in response to their rapidly changing age structures. That's why I have a lot more questions about emerging economies than perhaps Jesus does, and some certainty there that he's expressing, because some of these are non-democracies and they also don't have as entrenched welfare states. Some do, but some don't have as entrenched welfare states. And so they would have the ability to actually adjust in ways that we would only wish we could adjust in an advanced economy today.
Well, talking of advanced economies, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the role of technology. Jesus, we hear a lot of buzz about AI being that solution to loss of productivity, certainly in the global economy. Lower fertility rates are going to mean the workforce is going to shrink. So is AI the solution?
No. And so this is a subtle issue, so let me go in detail. So first of all, artificial intelligence is a very peculiar technology. It's very easy to design an artificial intelligence system that can do incredibly advanced mathematics. It's extremely difficult to design an artificial intelligence system that can clean my restroom. And this is a well-known paradox in computer science since the 1950s. Most of what we need in the world economy over the next 50 years will be people cleaning the restroom of older people. So artificial intelligence is just not going to help over there. Second, and even more important, is the fact that artificial intelligence is not going to show up as part of GDP. It's going to show up as increasing the welfare. What do I mean by that? Remember the old argument about ATMs. So you install an ATM, an automatic teller machine, and you fire the person who used to work in the bank office. That increases the welfare of people because now it's much easier to get your cash and you can get it in any moment that you want. You don't need to get the cash during the time the bank is open. But it means that measured GDP and hence what you can tax to pay for the welfare state actually goes down. Artificial intelligence is going to make our life much better, no doubt about it, but it's not solving the fiscal problems associated with aging. And it's not because the artificial intelligence system is not good, it's just because it's not the way we tax in modern societies. And by the way, there is no way to tax artificial intelligence that really gets around this problem.
So Jennifer, so far our whole conversation is about how falling fertility rates are a bad thing. There are these fiscal challenges that technology can't even save, and it's demographic challenges. But do you think that maybe ecological benefits of fewer people, could they maybe outweigh the social problems created?
I think we are a very long way from seeing that come to fruition. I think when we look at the relationship between population and the environment, we still have this mindset from maybe the 1960s or 70s that it's the individual numbers of people that matter the most. when of course we know that it's what we do on a daily basis. I mean, I sit here in front of me with a laptop, another computer, an iPad, an iPhone, all just right here in my office, all these lights on and the heat and all of that. My consumption level is out of control. And I think that the longer that we actually privilege economic growth as the holy grail, this thing that we're really working towards, what we're actually doing is offsetting. In our whole conversation, we are offsetting any potential ecological benefit by saying, we have to keep growing. We have to keep pumping into the economy. We need bigger. We need more expansive. We need to use consumption as our measure of what's good in society. Well, that really would undermine any gains that we might get in the environment. And so I would just say it is not automatic. It was something that would have to be set out as a goal. And I don't think we're anywhere close to that. You're certainly not going to find anybody in the private sector who is going to embrace that.
Jennifer Sciubba, Jesús Fernández-Villaverde, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Still to come here on the agenda, we'll dig deeper into China's efforts to encourage more women to become mothers.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to the agenda. As we've heard, China is one of the many countries across the globe to have recently recorded record low birth rates. The decline prompted the country's state council to introduce a series of birth-friendly policies to strengthen support in all kinds of areas, from education to employment. To look at those in more detail and to consider what's behind China's fertility issues, I'm now joined by Professor Paul Cheung from the Kuan School of Public Policy in Singapore. Thanks ever so much for coming on the agenda. Now, only 9 million births were recorded in China in 2023. That's the lowest since 1949. The fertility rate, reportedly under 1.0 in 2023, was far below that replacement level of 2.1. But there have been some localized rebounds, haven't there, in some regions, in Guangdong province, for example. How would you describe the current fertility situation nationwide?
Well, I'm not too worried. For one thing, I think the fertility rate for this year, the dragon year, the TFR will rebound, and the consensus estimate now is about 1.2. So I think that's good news to the government. And coming off the COVID, and then with the economic uncertainties, it's to be expected that the fertility rate will be dropping a little bit. So I'm not sure why there's so much concern about this temporary fluctuation.
Well, population policies have been relaxed in China over the past decade. That one-child policy, for example, is gone. Why do you think fertility rates are declining overall in China? I know you said you're not worried, but they are on a decline.
It is on a decline. And then let's look at Japan. Japan, the fertility rate had gone below replacement level for many years, almost 40 over years. And Japan is doing very well. For China, the TFR had dropped below replacement only for a short period of time. So I was in charge of Singapore's population policy in the 1980s. At that time, we also came through a very tough anti-natalist policy. So we stopped that, and then we reversed the policy to be pro-natalist. But the problem, of course, is that no matter how much money, how much resources we throw in, somehow the fertility has not really rebounded to the level that we want. So the problem for China is the same. After a long period of anti-natalist policy, it will take some time for the government to persuade the family to have a larger family size than what they now have been taught to have much smaller family size. But I'm hopeful.
So while you're waiting for those changes in policies to kick in, if you like, what's the impact of the falling fertility rate having on society, on the economy?
Well, for one thing, the age structure of China will change. And then the projection that we have in front of us from the UN, from the US Census Bureau, it shows an increasingly top-heavy age pyramid. But the decline has started only recently. It's a long game. So the government can do a lot to address the situation. And recently, we have heard people talking about Singapore going to extinct because our population has been declining. We are not going to go into extinction. There is a biological limit to this, yes, but then we are ways of boosting our fertility rate. So the same thing is true for China. A lot of people saying about the huge population problem that China is having. China is a huge population. There's a lot more the government can do to restructure the labor market, to enhance productivity, and to rationalize the workforce. So I'm not really worried about this temporary population decline in China.
Well, after all, what you're saying about China is pretty universal. You mentioned Japan. We might bring in South Korea and other countries which have population issues, if you like. But look, you talked about what needs to be done. So let's address that and what is being done to address it. I mean, earlier this year, China announced improved policies to promote childbirth, and that included refining parental leave policies and healthcare systems. Can things like that really offset the decline in fertility and decline in population numbers?
Yes, I would think so. I would say that these are the right steps, and the government need to put more resources into this. There are two components in this. One is to reduce the childbearing costs, and the other one to promote higher well-being among the families. At the same time, the government also need to address the marriage issue. I think surveys coming out from China have been saying that the younger people feel reluctant or delaying their marriage, and they don't really want to have a large family. So it takes time to address this issue. The China women are going into the workforce in large numbers. They're adopting a modern attitude. So for them to go back to the old way, to be the housewife, to bring up a large family is going to be quite difficult. Having a good infrastructure to reduce the childbearing difficulties and to help them to ease the burden of coping with work and the family is the right way to go.
But some of the new policies seem to specifically target rural areas. I wonder how big you think the gap is between the countryside and China's cities when it comes to this.
I think there's a big gap, and I think that is the right strategy. I'm really not worried about the urban fertility will always be lower. And it's really the rural people that will more likely to be able to increase their family size a lot more than the urban population. So I think this is the right strategy. But we should not look at the policy impact so quickly. It takes time to change attitude. It takes time for the family to take in the measures, to consider all the circumstances, and then be able to make the rational decision. This is a long game. We cannot expect instant, like turning on the switch to get the electricity and to get the light on. It's a long game. It involves the changing of the mindset, involves a recalculation of the benefits and costs of having a child. It involves inculcating a different set of attitudes toward family and children. So it is a long game.
I want to pick up on something you mentioned before about those studies in terms of marriage and people's intentions. Because studies in China show that highly educated young women have those lower intentions for marriage and for childbearing. And there's a huge survey now underway to explore public apprehensions about having children in China. How do you think that, those surveys, how might that inform policies to support fertility in the future?
Well, it will inform quite a bit. What this new set of findings show is that the younger generation is showing a modern set of attitudes towards work, towards career, towards family, towards their own self-identity. You cannot just impose a new set of values on them, saying that you stay home, you have a big family, and that's it. So the government had to accept that the younger generation will now adopt a more, what we call a modern set of attitudes, and then towards their own self-actualization. So given this, it takes a long time for the government to really try to introduce a new set of values, a new set of infrastructure to make family formation easier for the younger generation.
You talk about that long game, but while we're waiting for policies to kick in and for trends to change, of course, then there are demographic changes that happen that then weigh on society and on the economy, including an ageing population and the burden of elder care. What efforts do you see being made to address those things?
Yes, those are consequences from age structural changes, and then they are severe. But then with a good set of social policies, we can address those. So the government, the China government is concerned with its pension policies, the viability of the pension schemes, the underlying healthcare system for the older people. And so there are a lot of social infrastructural issues, and those things need to be addressed. But we have time. I don't think we are in that kind of a crisis mode. It takes time for the population to change. It takes time for the age structure to become extremely distorted. So right now we are talking about really a minor marginal effect for now. Let's look at Japan. Japan have population decline for over 30 years, and Japan is still doing very well. And recently there was a article in Bloomberg saying why Japan is doing so well despite its population issues. Yes, in the long run, there is still a lot of issues confronting Japan, but it goes to show that purely just looking at a single short window of, say, a few years, it doesn't mean that we are looking at the long game.
We've talked about the differences in terms of rural China and urban China and where you see the fertility rates going. But have any inroads been made in China to improve maybe the affordability and the equity of the childcare services that are on offer? Because that plays into it too.
Definitely. I think the infrastructure supporting childbearing and child rearing is extremely important. And there are a lot of stories about China, the rich people having extravagant set of services to support their childbirth. On the other hand, I'm quite sure that the common people are coping well. As I said, in the urban population, they may be facing more problems. And then whether in a rural area, when there's greater community support, I think the problem may be less. But we must come back to the macro situation. If China's economy continue to be slowing down, if the younger people are having more difficulty in finding jobs, and if the trade war becoming more intensified, this will affect the sentiments of the people. And this will have a dampening effect on their desire to have a family or have a larger family. So fertility rate is linked to people's perception of future. If they have an optimistic sense of the future, if they feel comfortable, they feel confident, they will have babies.
Professor Paul Cheung, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You can watch every episode of The Agenda in full on CGTN Europe's YouTube channel. And for exclusive extra content from me, my guests and the rest of the team, don't forget to check out The Agenda Show on TikTok.
Coming up on a future agenda, as China and the EU prepare to mark 50 years of diplomatic ties, just how do relations stand as we head into 2025? But for now, from me, Juliet Mann, and from all the Agenda team here in London, goodbye.